Hi everyone, it's Allie, and today we're going to talk about redemption arcs in modern fiction. So our culture definitely makes it seem like redemption is always a good thing. For example, one aspect of this is the influence Christianity has had on everything that we do and think, even for those who remain Christians or those who don't remain Christians but are still in a society that has that as its basis. Christianity has this idea that redemption is always good, that you can come back from anything and that is always a good thing and a positive thing. However, in modern fiction, sometimes it's possible to think that some of these tropes are overused. Today we're going to discuss some of these tropes, and here with me I have my friend Ryan, who's going to discuss some of these tropes with us. How you doing today, Ryan?
Oh, you know, Allie, this sweet caress of nihilism, teasing the edges of my fraying sanity. But I exist. Jury's still out on whether or not that's good.
Okay. I'm doing okay myself.
That's an answer, yeah.
What is a popular trope with the redemption arc that you want to discuss today?
So today I wanted to discuss, Allie, 3 common tropes used in terms of the redemption arc, the overarching umbrella regarding the process of redemption for characters in modern fiction. The first trope I wanted to discuss was a very popular trope, redemption equals death. Redemption equals death is popularized by the value of the human soul. Redemption equals death has to do with sacrificing one's life, dying permanently in a literary setting, to absolve you of all sins. It's interesting because we see in a lot of common literature, even in modern media, not just books, not just archaic fiction, we see characters giving their lives, be they villains or anti-villains, anti-heroes, and that ultimate sacrifice usually aligns with the protagonist's ethics, morals, and goals. The reason this is so good is that a character who might have been selfish through a majority of a story, through a majority of an arc, will perform the most selfless act and sacrifice themselves to save the day or save the world, etc. And this usually provides a positive spin on these characters because they've essentially killed themselves to come out on top.
You know what's interesting about that is I don't actually usually like the trope redemption equals death because I feel like a character has had his entire life, his entire experience to develop and to change into something different. And I feel like a lot of fiction takes it as like a last-ditch effort. Like, they don't really foreshadow it that well. The person dies, they make this huge sacrifice, and then we remember them in our memory as amazing, as someone who helped out the main character, and we kind of forget everything else they've done before that, when in reality it was just like a flip of a switch. It was such a quick decision. It wasn't like something that you could see them perpetually changing as a character. I don't know if I'm alone in that, if you kind of think the same thing, or how often do you think redemption equals death is actually done well?
So here's the thing with redemption equals death as a trope. When it's done well, it's done extremely well. And it's usually an incredibly powerful and potent plot point in any story. The problem is it's really easy to flub. It's really easy to mess up, and it'll just fall short and give the audience or the reader a kind of hollow feeling inside because they feel like they were cheated out of a more satisfying ending, be it a villain who would be just defeated by the protagonist, but instead made an entire heel-face turn and sacrificed themselves for the greater good, when it made 0 sense for the character in context.
I think you're right. Like, when it's done well, I think it's done really well, but in a lot of circumstances, I'd probably even say most, in what I've seen in just normal fiction all over the place, sometimes it's better just for the villain to die a bad guy, to die a villain, and that's it. I would actually prefer that at some points. If you have any opinions on this trope of redemption equals death, go ahead and leave those down in the comments. I'd love to read them. But right now, is there another one you'd like to discuss?
Yes, I'd like to talk about another common trope. This one isn't nearly as common as redemption equals death, but it falls under the same vein. And this trope is redemption equals affliction. I like to call it the softcore version of redemption equals death, when you really like a character, we'll just assume they're a villain for now. When you really like a villain, and you've grown really attached to them, but you don't want them to sacrifice themselves for saving the world, etc., etc. And, maybe they'll do something else, something much less severe in that scenario. So what they'll do in the case of redemption equals affliction is that the character will go out of their way and they will sacrifice something, be it a limb, their eyesight. If it's in a high fantasy setting, they'll sacrifice their magical powers.
Would this also be like thrown in prison for a long time, or living like a hard life for a while, or being like a slave or something like that? Or would you say it's like a physical mutilation?
Well, yes. Any type of sacrifice that doesn't have to do with the ultimate sacrifice of the character dying. Be it, like you said, imprisoned for a long time. Giving up their powers, for example. Or perhaps giving up their properties, their wealth. Things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical mutilation. Though that is probably one of the more grisly, but I'd say low-hanging fruits.
I actually like this one a little bit more. I still feel like at times it's not going to be used that well, in my opinion. I think it kind of gives this narrative that life is fair, and that if you've done a bad thing, you're going to pay for it in some way, and when they change, they pay for it, they pay a price, they do something drastic. When in reality, I feel like sometimes when a bad guy changes into a good guy, it's more like a subtle change. Like, I don't know that many bad guys that go through that many harsh things. Sometimes it makes sense in the circumstance of the book, especially if you said in a high fantasy novel, something like that. Do you think that this approach is realistic to how you would see it actually occurring?
I do think it's realistic. The very often overlooked strength of redemption equals affliction is that in the terms of redemption equals death, the character is dead. There is no room for growth. There is no room for redemption. There is no room for explaining why this character might have done something like that.
I think also going along with that kind of proves, so you kind of said that character equals, or redemption equals death. The character's gone, you don't get to see it. You kind of get to prove that's a real redemption in a way when you keep them alive, and you also keep them going through something difficult. So life isn't easy. They have to really prove if they have been redeemed. Exactly.
So with the case of redemption equals affliction, be they physically mutilated or go from aristocracy to becoming a hermit, a pauper, anything of the like, the strengths of this common trope is that they are able to pay for their actions, go from their place of evil, and then work to their place of good.
Yeah, so I think for me, it really depends on the circumstances for this to be done well. I think it can be done more easily than redemption equals death in a way that I find effective as a reader. I definitely still feel like the circumstances have to make sense. You can't make it too drastic. It has to be something that's kind of been foreshadowed, something that kind of makes sense within the realm that the story exists in. And then I think I actually like the trope.
Yes.
You agree with that?
I completely agree with that.
Okay.
I am much more privy to redemption equals affliction as opposed to its older brother, redemption equals death.
What about like a failed redemption with that? Like the redemption equals affliction, a bad character has supposedly redeemed themselves, and then through this affliction we see that maybe it's not as complete as it had been. Do you like that?
Well, so in terms of failed redemption, when you have redemption equals affliction, the character's still alive, they still have all of their past experiences, and the chance for relapse is always looming. A character can easily segue back into their less than savory attitudes and habits. That being said, usually when a character goes through multiple phases of redemption, it wears down and kind of becomes lackluster and stale for them as a character.
I can see that.
And at a certain point, they just need to commit redemption or perdition.
At the same time, I really do like the stories where you don't know. Like, you think they've been redeemed, but you're not quite sure. They kind of go back and forth. And if it's done well, I actually like that aspect of being unsure if the redemption's actually being completed 100%. So we have one more to talk about. What is that?
The third common trope I would like to talk about is redemption gives life. Redemption gives life is definitely a less commonly used trope. This is often imagined as maybe a antagonistic character, maybe not a villain, but antagonistic character, goes and sacrifices themselves for the greater good, as is common. But that doesn't absolve them of sin, doesn't absolve them of their crimes. So, benevolent Deus Ex Machina shows up.
For those who don't know what Deus Ex Machina is, can you go ahead and explain that a little bit?
Oh, yep, totally. A Deus Ex Machina is translated to God from the machine. It's referred to as a literary tool where some benevolent, all-knowing being, seemingly out of the woodwork, appears and bestows some manner of divine providence unto our characters in a story. For this example, a Deus Ex Machina, benevolent, random, omnipotent, and omnipresent being, shows up and restores life to this character who is sacrificed.
It's like the ultimate redemption story, in a way, where they change and they get rewarded for it almost, and they're able to live a happy life.
Yes, it goes to the fact that this character was willing to sacrifice everything for a force higher than themselves. And because of that, they were rewarded with their sacrifice back to them. They were basically refunded.
That kind of reminds me back at like the almost one of the origins of this being Christianity, and the idea that if you repent, so to speak, then you get rewarded in the end. But this is done within a fiction story, within a novel.
Yes.
Okay. I think I've seen that one less than the others. I think you're right.
Correct. It is one of the least used, most difficult to execute, most definitely.
Yeah, because you don't want to seem like you're just rewarding the bad guy.
Correct.
And it's really hard, I feel like, to find that balance between just rewarding the bad guy for being bad the second they decided to be good, and have it be an actual, maybe heartwarming story.
Correct.
And I think it's a lot easier to see that it was important when it is redemption equals death, redemption equals persecution. When it's redemption equals you get everything and you're rewarded, it's really hard to make that very clear.
Yes.
But when it is, I imagine it's amazing.
Yes, when it is, it's a very cathartic and very, very satisfying resolution.
Okay, so just to end now, what would be like 3 lines of advice you would give to authors when they use the redemption tropes?
You always want to be foreshadowing these kinds of things. Foreshadowing is extremely important. You want character interactions to slowly but very surely build up so that their final, ultimate decision makes sense. A second piece of advice that I would give is exploring multiple different types of tropes. There's nothing wrong with using the 3 common tropes: redemption equals death, affliction, or life. But explore a little bit out there. Try to find less common used tropes and study works of literature or works of media that use these tropes.
Make it unique. Don't just stick to the same tropes that we love, but maybe have it overused. It may not always be done well.
Going off of that, Allie, you should always seek to make a trope your own in some way. And the third, and probably the most important piece of advice I can offer to authors, is ask yourself, is a redemption arc even really necessary?
I agree with that. Like, sometimes the bad guy stays a bad guy, and I like that.
Yes.
And I think that even in modern fiction, we start to see a little bit more grittier fiction coming across because people like it.
Yes.
You don't always want it to be a perfect redemption.
Yes, I can tell you a well-written villain who dies a villain is...
Better than a poorly written villain who dies a hero.
Exactly. Are you doing it just to save this character that you really enjoy?
Fan service is another one.
Fan service is a really important one.
Everyone likes the bad guy, so we're going to make him a good guy. No.
Exactly. So, ask yourself why you're doing this and if it's really necessary.
Thanks for sitting through this long talk with us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a like. And consider subscribing to the channel. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.